So, welcome, class. Welcome to this continuation of Lecture 11 Mitigation Strategies for Transportation. So, we were talking about factors affecting fuel efficiency, and we had mentioned driving conditions, both relation to speed and highway versus city driving. So, due to increased wind resistance at higher speeds, fuel efficiency starts to decline at speeds above 50 miles per hour. Um, the wind resistance of a vehicle is proportional to the speed squared. Um, Newer vehicles have better aerodynamics. Your book mentions this. And so over time, the um, speed at which fuel efficiency starts declining has gone up, basically able to go faster before the fuel efficiency starts declining. Okay, vehicles traveling at 75 miles per hour, though, are still about 20% less efficient than those at 55 miles per hour. Just looking at that factor alone. Okay, so for a lot of rural highways in the U.S., the speed limit is 75 miles per hour. So in rural California, it can be 70 miles per hour on I-5 or 99, but in some states it's 75 miles per hour. So actually, this is a pretty common speed limit on rural freeways in the U.S. Now, in 1973, there was an oil crisis. The Yom Kippur War occurred in October 1973, and it was between a number of countries, including Egypt and Syria on one side and Israel on the other, and the U.S. being an ally of Israel, in the case for a long time, sided with Israel. And so some of the OPEC countries, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries in the Middle East, major oil exporters, shut off or disrupted the supply of oil to the US. So there were long lines at gas stations. You could only buy gasoline on certain days of the week. Okay, there's a picture of your book, from your book, showing a long line at a gas station in the early 70s. Maybe your parents or grandparents may remember this. So this national maximum speed limit law set speed limits at 55 miles per hour across the country, and it was designed to reduce oil consumption. Okay, and using this principle we just talked about. So if you go a little slower, that will improve fuel efficiency, which saves oil. Now, this law was not popular. Congress raised the limit to 65 miles per hour in 1987 and repealed the law entirely in 1995. And local authorities now set speed limits. The highest posted speed limit in the United States is 85 miles per hour, believe it or not. It's about a 40-mile stretch of State Highway 130 in Texas that has the speed limit. And it's very rural, very infrequent merges or intersections with roads. So can drive faster. But driving at 85 miles per hour would definitely have a significantly lower fuel efficiency than, say, at 60, even 65. So, yeah, in San Francisco, there's not many freeways. There was backlash against the planned freeways in the 50s, there was talk of San Francisco having a lot of freeways, and residents were not a fan of it because San Francisco, you might know, it's not that large an area, and the freeways could really disrupt the beauty of the city and cause buildings to literally be torn down near the freeways. Um, so but there are a few. There's 101 that goes into the city, 28, and then turns into 80. That's where 80 starts, going across the Bay Bridge. And there's 280 that goes into the city. And there's a stretch of 101 in southern San Francisco, not South San Francisco the city, but the southern San Francisco city limits, and continuing toward downtown, and then continue toward downtown where the speed limit's 40 to 50 miles per hour, even though it's a freeway. It goes through an urban area, and there's often traffic, and there are some curves. So this figure from your book, 7.13, shows fuel efficiencies in kilometers per liter, the units for fuel efficiency across most of the world, of US vehicles, new US vehicles, as a function of speed in kilometers per hour. So yes, the units are metric, but it does show you how the older vehicles had much lower fuel efficiencies. Okay, you see the vehicles, these 13 representative vehicles from 1970 or earlier, having significantly lower fuel efficiencies than vehicles, say, from the early 80s, shown in blue, late 80s to late 90s in red, and newer vehicles, although not new these days, shown in kind of this brown color. And through technology, again, being able to manufacturers have been able to make cars that can go a little faster before fuel efficiency starts coming down. Okay, so it used to be less. Okay, here you can see that around 60 kilometers per hour, which is only 40, 45 miles per hour. But look at the new vehicles shown in the brown. You can go faster. Okay. Also, you see that actually for the vehicles in the late 80s, late 90s, for these, now there's 9 representative vehicles, but you could actually go even faster before fuel efficiency starts to go down. So another factor affecting fuel efficiency is driving behavior. Speed's important, but it's second to driving behavior in determining fuel efficiency of a given car, okay, or driving a given vehicle. So quick acceleration, okay, stepping on the gas pedal, heavy braking, stepping heavily on the brake, right, decrease fuel efficiency by over 30%. And this is why automobile manufacturers advertise 2 efficiencies for each car. Okay. And so if you are looking to buy a car and you're at the dealership, right, whether it's a new or used car, there will be a piece of paper in the window usually giving information on the vehicle, how many miles are on it, maybe the pricing information, and you'll see 2 numbers showing you the city and highway fuel efficiency in the US in miles per gallon. And for gasoline-powered vehicles, solely powered by gasoline, highway fuel efficiency tends to be anywhere from a few, 3, 4 miles per gallon to 7, 8 miles per gallon higher, advertised. Okay, and there's a lot of reasons you might not get that full fuel efficiency. The weather can affect fuel efficiency. If it's colder, the engine has to work harder. Elevation really affect going uphill, for example, you will have lower fuel efficiency. So if you're going downhill, though, your fuel efficiency is higher because you have to use less energy to actually go, because some of it's the process of going downhill is simply due to gravity, right? That's why if you're in the second or third gear, the standard driving gear, you have to brake if you're going down. So sometimes you might put your vehicle in lower gear if you're going say downhill if you're driving through mountains to save the brakes. So um, it's a good idea, by the way. Helps preserve the brakes and not have to step on them as much. So due to the number of cars increasing faster than road capacity, congestion has risen. The book mentions that the number of vehicles, the distances they travel are many times greater than a couple decades ago, while road construction has lagged behind. So we've seen this in the Bay Area in the last several years. You know, before the pandemic, sometimes on Friday, the getaway day, people want to go early and they may take off work early. The commute can start in the early afternoon. I've seen traffic start on 680 North in Fremont going toward the Sunol grade at 1:30 p.m. on Friday. So book mentions that in the past 50 years, in the US, the total length of roads was extended by 15%. But over that same period, the number of vehicles on the roads tripled. Now, the roads have become wider. Used to have a lot more 1 or 2 lane roads. So more congestion will cause your highway fuel efficiency to come down because you're going to be braking and accelerating more. So there are ways to try to improve fuel efficiency and speed despite more traffic, carpool lanes. And in the Bay Area recently, there's been construction of more of those fast track lanes. So you have options. You could either pay, sometimes it can be several dollars to literally travel a few miles if the traffic's really heavy, or you can have a carpool, which is good because that's going to be lowering the number of vehicles on the road, helping mitigate against global warming, but you still might have to pay a few dollars. Whereas the carpool lanes are free if you have enough people, and it's carpool hour. And also, again, if you are in a motorcycle, you can go in the carpool lane for free. But I'm not sure about the fast track lane. You still might have to pay. So, recently there was a fast track lane, an HOV lane, constructed on 680 through the Sunol grade. Actually, one in both directions, and that should really help because that Sunol grade has some of the worst traffic in the Bay Area when it's prime commute. Sometimes on Friday, it starts in early afternoon and ends in mid to late evening. So another factor that's related to fuel efficiency is taxes. In 2006, 15 years ago, the average cost of extracting, transporting, and refining a gallon of gasoline was $2.01, $2.01. So a couple dollars per gallon to remove the oil from the ground, transport to where it's refined, and refine it. There's a couple large oil refineries in the Bay Area. There's the Chevron refinery near Richmond. There's the Shell refinery near Martinez. And even though there's a set amount, the price of gasoline is high, or not set amount, but this average amount, the price of gasoline is greatly variable across the world. In 2013, the average price of gasoline at the pump was anywhere between about 9 cents per gallon and $9.50 per gallon. Incredible range. And there's different factors that affect the gasoline prices. They depend on subsidies and taxes. Some of the major oil exporters of the world, oil exporting countries, subsidize the fuel, and therefore it's less expensive in the country. Whereas others tax fuel, and some countries have higher taxes on fuel. You have to pay more. Some of the more environmental countries in Western Europe have higher gas prices because of the taxes, and it's trying to help restrict, oil consumption, which again, there's a relationship between consuming oil, burning it in a internal combustion engine, and greenhouse gas emissions, right? So as of today, April 28th, 2021, average price of unleaded gasoline in the US is $2.89 per gallon. In California, you think it's higher? $4.01 per gallon. So it's about $4 per gallon for the entire state. It does vary in our state. It varies locally. San Jose, there's some places, there's some stations you can get it down for close to $3.50, $3.60 per gallon. A few. There's others where it's close to $4.50 per gallon. So taxes on fuel can be an attractive source of revenue. The book mentions that about 10.8% of all revenues collected by governments in 2004 was from taxes on fuel, over $1 trillion, $1.2 trillion. And they can be easier to collect. Sometimes they are included in the price of gasoline. You see the price you pay per gallon, but it doesn't say the taxes, right? It doesn't tell you the different costs, not just the fuel, but taxes. So here's a chart showing gasoline prices in various countries for the year 2013. And you can see in Venezuela how inexpensive the gasoline prices are. Now, you might have followed the news, 2019, right, into 2020, and still today, a lot going on in Venezuela, right? Tough situation down there. So Saudi Arabia has very inexpensive gas prices, the top oil producing country in the world. And you'll see different Middle Eastern countries have inexpensive gas prices, the oil producers and exporters. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, okay, Iraq. So you can look at, on the other extreme, gas price in Turkey, over $9 per gallon. Gas prices are very expensive in the United Kingdom here, according to this figure, $8 per gallon. And the gas prices in countries like United Kingdom and Turkey, at the station, they might not look that high because they're per liter, okay? Now also there's, the different currencies, right? That too, okay? But for example, in Canada, where right now I'd say $1.25, $1.50 Canadian dollars in $1 US. Because they use the metric system, we should say per liter, and there's about 3.5 liters in a gallon. So it might look really cheap, and then you say, oh, you have to multiply by over 3 to convert to per gallon. So in many countries, taxes on fuel represent a major source of government revenue. This figure from the book shows percentages of total revenues deriving from taxes on fuel. And basically, where you see countries with the green, they show, the bars show what percentage of a country's government revenue comes from taxes on fuel, solely on that. On the other hand, where you have the red bars, okay, going the other direction, that's because those countries subsidize fuel, and the government actually spends a certain percentage of its money, given by the value on fuel. So in South Korea, 1/3 of their entire government revenue is from taxes on fuel. Albania, Sierra Leone generate about 1/4 of their government revenue from taxes on fuel. In the US, it's about 12%, along with Chile, Czech Republic, France. Okay. Now, on the other hand, Venezuela, you remember the country with very inexpensive gas prices, several gallons for $1. 70% of the government revenue is spent to subsidize fuel. That's why the gas prices are cheap. Same with Yemen. Okay. Now, in the US, here, gasoline prices vary greatly by state due to tax differences. Okay. As you saw, right now, the average gas price in the US is just under $3 per gallon. But in California, it's $4 per gallon. And for years, California has had some of the highest gas prices of any state. It's usually California and Hawaii with the highest gas prices. Okay. Hawaii is an environmental state, expensive state to live in, right? Beautiful, right? Like paradise, you know. So nice place to visit. And now Southwest has some cheap flights to Hawaii, and other airlines have had to compete, have lowered their prices too, like Hawaiian Airlines. So they had a really good control on the pandemic too there. So here is a figure from the website Gas Buddy. That's where those values came from too. Earlier, the average gas prices in the US and California came from Gas Buddy. It's a site. They also have an app. Maybe some of you actually might know about it, where you can look at a map and see the gas prices overlaid on the map. Okay. You can also, when you open it, look at the variety in prices close to you. Okay. So you could look at a map, and if you want to see if you want to travel a bit for cheaper gas prices, but you could also see where the gas stations are closest to you and their prices. So here is the lower 48, right? And here's Hawaii, here's Alaska. So where you have the yellow shade and the highest gas prices, over $3.57 per gallon, it's California, right? All of California. And all of Hawaii, okay? Now, Washington also has high gas prices, okay? Not as high in some parts as California, okay? Oregon also has gas prices over $3 a gallon for, it looks like a lot of area of the state, okay? On the other hand, if you go to southern Texas, southern Louisiana, parts of Mississippi, okay, Arkansas, North Carolina, you can get gas for close to $2 a gallon today, okay? So there's some states in the South that have cheaper gas prices, lower taxes, also close to the Gulf. There's oil, right, rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. So that's true. And even New York, which is also known for higher gas prices, they're not as high as California. So now, another factor affecting fuel efficiency is consumer preferences. What type of vehicles do people want to buy? So some consumers prefer smaller and cleaner vehicles. Okay, hybrids, small vehicles are popular in the Bay Area. Others prefer larger vehicles with faster acceleration. They're sports cars, right? Really good acceleration, not the best on fuel efficiency. And in some parts of the country, people like trucks, okay, larger trucks. So through technological innovation, efficiency has still increased slightly in the US, even though vehicles have become larger overall. So you have several, two graphs, but with different plots on the graphs, different curves, and what you're looking at is weight and power on the upper graph for vehicles sold in the US and European Union, Western European countries. And on the bottom graph, acceleration and efficiency shown for the US and European Union. So when you look at weight in red for the US vehicles, you see the weight going down from the mid 70s to early 80s, okay, as well as the power. So smaller, less powerful vehicles in response to the oil crises, okay. And then from the early 80s, continuing into the 90s, the early 2000s, the power increased significantly, as did the weight, but the power increased at a faster rate, able to make more powerful vehicles that are lighter. Okay, you can see that. Now, there's not as long of a period of data for the European Union vehicles, but what you'll see is that they weigh less, right? Comparing the orange curve here to the red one, and they're less powerful, smaller, lighter vehicles. And then on the bottom, if you focus on that, we're looking at acceleration of US vehicles in purple and efficiency in green. So for a few years, the acceleration, now it doesn't actually mean when the plot, the purple curve is higher, it doesn't actually mean faster acceleration. It's actually slower, because if you look at the y-axis, okay, it shows you vehicle acceleration in seconds for 0 to 60 miles per hour, how long it takes to go from 0 to 60. And back in the early 80s, it could take a full 16, 17 seconds. This is for typical, basically, US vehicles, new ones, to go from 0 to 60. A third of a minute, that just seems so slow, right? Because now there's vehicles that can go from 0 to 60 in a few seconds, okay? But efficiency went up. And so over time, even as the vehicles in the US have become heavier, more powerful, and with faster accelerations, by the time we got into the mid-2010s, new vehicles in the US went from 0 to 60 in 8 seconds. Okay, maybe slower for hybrids, right? Faster, obviously, for sports cars. Efficiency has still gone up through technology. So this figure here shows basically different types of vehicles sold in the US from 1975 to about 2015. And cars were the dominant type of personal vehicle, I should say light duty vehicle. Okay. Cars were the dominant type back in the mid 70s, the early 80s. But over time, other classes of light duty vehicles, well, there's classes of cars themselves, but other types of light duty vehicles have become popular. Okay, so green crossovers, those are kind of crosses between SUVs and cars, the smaller SUVs. The SUVs used to be more truck based, maybe higher up, lower fuel efficiency. Now there's some smaller SUVs, crossovers, that are good for fuel efficiency. There's hybrids. By the way, there used to only be like the Prius, the original hybrid, but there's hybrid SUVs now, hybrid minivans. So if you bought a new car, say your grandparents bought a new car in 1975 in the US, chances are it was a car or a truck, okay? If you consider a truck a car. So again, it's just a light duty vehicle. Basically, if here you see from 100% to close to 20%, that means 80% of the new light duty vehicles sold in the US were cars, and the 15% or so were trucks, and only a small percentage were minivans and SUVs. Okay. Now, we talked about the vehicles become lighter here in the late 70s. Okay. So then what changes? As you start to go into the 80s, minivans become more popular. See that? The blue shade thickening. That's showing you a greater percentage of minivans of new light-duty vehicles sold. And peaking in the mid-90s, minivans are really popular in the mid-90s. Okay, soccer moms, sometimes drive minivans. But the Toyota RAV4 was one of the first popular crossovers, largely sold crossovers. Okay, and then after the minivans had their popularity, still, a choice, but not as popular. And what became more popular were SUVs. Okay, as you went toward the 21st century, right after 2000. So now, only about half of the new light-duty vehicles sold in the U.S. are actually cars. Okay, there's a significant chunk that are SUVs, trucks, pickup trucks have become less popular. Still popular in some parts of the country. Another factor affecting fuel efficiency is diesel-powered vehicles. Diesel's different than gasoline. It's denser, more mass per volume. So because it contains more mass per volume, it contains more energy per volume. And diesel engines are more efficient than gasoline engines at converting fuel engine energy into mechanical work. Okay, so large trucks, buses, agriculture vehicles sometimes have diesel engines to take advantage of this higher efficiency. And many countries, in consideration of diesel, don't tax the fuel as heavily as gasoline. Right now, sometimes diesel prices are cheaper than gasoline prices per gallon. Now, in the 20th century, the diesel-powered vehicles weren't as popular for some because of different factors. The diesel engines could be noisy and emit dark smoke, not good for air quality, sometimes be more difficult to start. The ride might be bumpier. But through technology now, the newer diesel engines are not as noisy, and the vehicles are cleaner, okay, and they start easier through technology. So diesel engines obtain about 40% higher fuel efficiency per volume than gasoline engines of the same power. So, by the way, in response to improvements and rising cost of petroleum, the market share of diesel-powered light-duty vehicles in the European Union has doubled during the past decade, according to your book. And in some countries, half the new vehicles, light-duty vehicles sold are diesel. Okay, the engine sounds different. So now, here, actually, we're looking at percent market share of new diesel-powered light-duty vehicles in the European Union. And how it's changed from 2001 to 2013. So in Austria, right, Arnold Schwarzenegger's home country, already by 2003, that was when he was inaugurated as governor of California. So already 70+% of the new light-duty vehicles sold were diesel powered. Okay. And diesel-powered light-duty vehicles were popular in France as well. Okay, if you've been there, you might see them. Spain, Belgium. Okay, so in a couple of these countries, around 4/5 of the ones sold in around 2008. It's when the Great Recession was going on, around 2008, and then Obama took office, and we did get out of that recession afterward. So some countries, they did become less popular. So Austria, they were popular, and then not as much as you went forward, okay, into the later part of the 2000s, okay. And they haven't been as popular in the Netherlands, okay. Interestingly, in the UK, yeah, about half the new light-duty vehicles sold are diesel. Now, by the way, the average lifetime of vehicles on the road has increased. Okay, um, in years, they can last longer, and people when I and so it used to be around in the U.S. around the average the vehicle on the road, light duty vehicle on the road was 8 years old. Now it's or it might last 8 years. Now it's more like 11 years, according to your book. Um, okay. We mentioned automobile manufacturer agreements affecting fuel efficiency. Okay. In 1975, the U.S. enacted the corporate average fuel economy regulations. Remember, fuel economy is another name for fuel efficiency, saying the fuel efficiency of cars and small trucks and manufacturers' U.S. fleet must meet a minimum average value. Okay, and this is Congress, right? Um, basically, um, looks like this could be a State of the Union address. Tonight, there's a President Biden is delivering an address. It's not called the State of the Union because it's his first. It's during his first year of his um, presidency, and there won't be as many people. COVID, I think they're limited to 200. Sometimes during the State of the Union, there's 1,000, 1,100 people. So, in 1978, the regulations said that the basically new vehicles sold in the U.S. had to meet a threshold fuel efficiency of 18 miles per gallon for cars, 17 miles per gallon for small trucks. By 85, the standards went up to 28 miles per gallon for cars, 22 miles per gallon for trucks. They haven't always been met, and there's been some disagreements. Some of the automobile manufacturers haven't been as fond of the CAFE regulations in some ways, saying it could disrupt the mix. So back, but some of the arguments were older back in the mid '70s that there won't be as many, trucks, SUVs. The cars will be smaller. Although again, with technology, what we've seen is as fuel efficiency has gone up, right? Through technology, right? There's still a greater percentage of new light duty vehicles sold that are SUVs, crossovers. Okay, so there was also concern about safety if you make the smaller cars. See the heavier cars might be safer. Okay, cost. So, but yeah, technology is really amazing. How our vehicles become better able to run, and there's the safety features right of the cars today, right? There's the alert you can in your vehicle, if you're like going too fast to a car in front of you, right? There's the early braking system warning, right? So emission efficiency here, looking at a figure showing basically different countries' regulations on emissions from transportation, from vehicles. Grams of carbon dioxide per kilometer. 1 kilometer, remember from lecture 1, 0.62 miles. So it's good when you see these different curves going down as we go forward, because that means less CO2 emitted per distance traveled. So we have historic values shown by the solid lines between years, and enacted targets shown by the dashed lines, and proposed targets shown by the dotted lines. Okay, so we have North American countries, right? We have the U.S., Canada, Mexico. We have a couple of the largest Asian countries, larger ones. Well, we do have some of the largest: China, India, Japan. We have European Union. You do see the standards in the U.S. weren't as high as for the EU. The EU has really good standards, really good. There's really good standards on the from the government on the automobile manufacturers. Okay, and so Remember, today, the average, as of 2018, average fuel efficiency of a new light-duty vehicle sold in the U.S. is up to about 28 miles per gallon, or 27, is it? It's a little higher for car, it's lower for truck, okay? But there's cars sold in the US, or sorry, in the European Union, the average, with higher fuel efficiencies, the average fuel efficiency of light-duty vehicles sold in the US, in the European Union these days is close to 40 to 50 miles per gallon in some countries, okay? By the way, India, really good, optimistic, and really helpful emission reduction targets for transportation. Now, public transportation and other modes of transportation besides driving. We've been talking about light-duty vehicles, right, which implies driving. And by the way, most people in the US drive to work or school or what have you alone. That's not the only way to get around. So if we look at different modes of transportation, we can actually compare the carbon footprint of them. And I think you'll really be interested in these next couple of slides. Bicycling, right? Some of you have a bike, right? Walking, right? Running, maybe some of you run for exercise and it's good, stress relief, endorphins, right? Have the lowest carbon footprint. Okay. In general, public transportation has a lower carbon emission intensity than private. Greenhouse gas emissions from these modes of transportation vary greatly. An important factor in the carbon emission intensity of a mode of transportation, that's actually in looking at the carbon emitted per person per distance traveled, okay, is occupancy. The more people you can put in a vehicle, right, then the less carbon emitted, not for the vehicle, but per person. So we're going to be talking about carbon emission intensity. We're actually looking at emissions per distance traveled per person, okay? So, with the pandemic, right, Uber Pool wasn't happening, right? But, and then, carpools weren't as popular. But now, with people getting vaccinated, more people getting vaccinated, if you have vaccinated people together, it's pop in a car. That should be safer, especially if you still wear masks, right? Definitely the pandemic has changed, lifestyle and how we might act. Even if we're vaccinated, it's still good, obviously, to try to take measures, to prevent getting sick. There's a reason that the flu, the influenza is way down this year in the US, right? So it's, good practice to wash your hands, right? Okay. Now this figure shows carbon emission intensity of various modes of transportation in the UK in blue, US in red, or either in purple. And we're looking at the units of grams of carbon per person per kilometer per 0.62 miles, right? So bicycling has a carbon emission intensity of only a few grams of carbon per person per kilometer, right? You might say, how? It doesn't have a motor, right? You're still breathing, right? There's carbon in you. And when you breathe out, that carbon combines with oxygen, the second most abundant gas in our atmosphere, to produce CO2. Of course, you do breathe back in, right? Walking and running, okay, slightly higher, it looks like, than bicycling. And then we have several modes of train travel. There's city trains, that could be the Muni Metro, VTA. There's intercity train, could be BART, right? Commuter train, could be Caltrain, or which runs faster. Commuter train kind of, to me, it implies it runs faster. Maybe ACE, if you've been on ACE, it goes from San Jose out past through the Altamont Pass, or kind of it goes near 580, and it goes out to Stockton, out into the valley. There's plans to possibly extend it to Modesto, Amtrak. So Capital Corridor was a popular option for people to go from Bay Area to Sacramento or vice versa. So it does look like these different methods of train travel have similar carbon emission intensities for the UK or US, but you do see for the US, it looks like it's about roughly twice as much or so, maybe a little more for city, actually more for city transit. Now, why is that? Does that mean that the UK trains are cleaner? Possibly. Also, again, occupancy is going to be a critical factor. In places where there are more people on the trains, right? That's going to lower the carbon emission intensity. Okay. Right now, though, with the pandemic, right? If you see the VTA light rail, there's only a few people, right, on say a single car, right? And that's good for social distancing, right? And people are required to wear masks, right, indoors still, so yeah, before the pandemic, San Francisco, sometimes Muni is crowded throughout the day. Buses can be New York, right? I used to live in Walnut Creek, and the county connection buses don't run very often. And sometimes during the middle of the day, there's only a few people on a large bus. So now that's talking about buses, because it's very interesting. Compare bus carbon emission intensity and car carbon emission intensity. In the UK, car carbon emission intensity is significantly higher than for bus. But in the United States, according to this figure, bus emission intensity is actually higher than carbon emission intensity, right? So that's might be a little discouraging, because it means there's more grams of carbon emitted per person per kilometer traveled by buses than cars. And isn't, part of the point of riding the bus to help the environment, right? Again, occupancy. So part of this is because not enough people are riding the bus. Cars are still really popular, right? So, in order to make the buses effective at helping reduce emissions, improve air quality, and mitigate global warming, you need people riding the bus, right? Because they're big and they burn a lot of diesel. Oh, they did. By the way, this figure is several years old. Things change. So we mentioned this last time, but hybrid buses are becoming more popular. So this data is from several years ago, to be fair. And if we looked at a figure more recently, the author is updating figures constantly. He's updating the book. You might see an improvement because our buses are becoming more efficient. And also we're having natural gas buses like in LA, Grand Canyon. Okay. Personal trucks have higher carbon emission intensities in both US and UK. Not surprising. Okay, cruise ships can take a lot of energy to run, right? And they make food in the kitchens and have entertainment going. And a really high carbon emission intensity method of travel is helicopter, because in a helicopter, there's only a few people, right? Helicopter can only fit a handful of people, and it takes a lot of energy to fly, to get off the ground and to go places, okay? Despite incentives for carpool lanes and toll breaks over recent years, single occupancy vehicles are the most popular method of transportation in the US. This figure shows the number of people in millions in the US who travel to work via different modes of transportation. Okay. And we have a single occupancy vehicle, just one person in, the driver in the vehicle. Carpool, right? More than one person. Public transit, bus, train. Other. What's other? Walking, bicycling. Okay. There's some actually colleagues of mine in our department who bike, either bike teachers, there's some teaching colleagues. Also, there's some students that bike to school, or maybe bike to Caltrain and then bike from Caltrain, or walk to Caltrain and walk from Caltrain. Or this again, this is pre-pandemic. So yeah, as of 2007, about 105 million Americans travel to work each day via single occupancy vehicle. 15 million via carpool, close to 10 million via public transit, which is just less than 1/10 of those who drive, and then a few million other. Depends where you go, right? Bay Area has different modes of transportation. We have a lot of bike lanes in San Jose and San Francisco, and that is more popular than some parts of the country. In some parts of the country, they're more spread out. In rural areas, you can't use the bus because there isn't one, right? So you have to remember that. In LA, more spread out and it is more popular to drive, right? Of course, there's all these freeways there, right? But over the years, there has been some subways built, right? There's a couple subway lines now of the LA Metro. So, by the way, in New York, it's really, people ride the subway. There, it's actually faster to ride the subway often because of traffic. So, yeah, you really don't need a car if you live in New York. If you live in San Francisco, you don't need a car. Can be helped, but parking is an issue. That's why it can be helpful not to have a car, because you don't have to worry about parking. So, but it makes things easier. Actually, personally, I didn't get a car until a few years back, let's say, and I was just very used to, like, when I went to school, taking the bus or the BART, okay, or walking. But it's nice to have a car to be able to go places, hiking, and it gives you more options, right, for traveling, right? Especially now during the pandemic with for less service, right? Public transit. So here's a figure showing gas prices and oil prices in the US from 1990 to 2016. So this definitely, covers all or most of your lifetime. In fact, for a lot of you, right? This is your lifetime, right? Or the first part of, it doesn't include the last few years. So there's a relationship between the price of gasoline you pay and the price of oil, because gasoline is made from oil. Okay, it's extracted, oil's from the ground, and then it has to be refined, and the unwanted substances are removed. And by the way, there's a such thing as top tier gasoline. The major gasoline companies in the US have top tier gasoline, where their gasoline meets a certain threshold to be classified as such. And the detergent, they have the detergents that help clean your engine out. Now, that includes Chevron, Shell, 76, Valero, Arco. Arco has cheaper gas prices because they don't allow you to use a credit card. So they're able to save money on that processing wise. You can still use your debit card, but you have to pay 35 cents. Some of the smaller, like, non-chain gas stations, or even some smaller chains like Rotten Robbie, they still meet a minimum threshold, but they're not top tier. And from what I've read, it can be helpful at least a lot of the time to use top tier, because it will help improve your engine and help your car run longer. Okay. So, okay. Now, in the 90s, right? Most of you are too young to remember this. Gas prices in the US varied between $1 and $1.50 per gallon. Okay. Remember, this is a kid, cheap gas prices. And the price of oil was hovering around 15 to 20 to $25 per gallon. Sorry, per barrel. And then the gas price in the US started going up as we went forward into the mid 2000s. Now they were a little higher in the early 2000s, and this went forward in the mid to late 2000s. They are going up, right? For the first time, right? At least since 1990, they exceeded $2 per gallon in 2005. Just a few years later, they were over $3 per gallon. That was driven by higher oil prices. Okay. Then after the recession, or during the recession, gas prices toppled. Okay. In 2008 and into early 2009. Okay. So, but I mean, the unemployment rate in the US was high. There were foreclosures, right? Homes being lost, right? The reason that gas prices were cheap is because the economy was struggling. And then they went back up, and gas prices really peaked in the early 2010s here, over $3.50 per gallon nationally, right? There have been times where in some parts of California, the gas prices have hit $5 per gallon in the past. Rural areas, really rural areas, or tourist attraction areas, where there's no other gas stations in like a certain area. So of course the gas station owner or manager can charge more, right? Because there's not competition. But very interesting, gas prices in the US started declining as we went forward here toward the end of Obama's term. And it had to do with finding ways to drill for oil. Okay. So this figure shows US monthly crude oil production from 1920 to 2017. Millions of barrels per day. Okay. So you see all the way from 1920 to 1970, oil production in the US increasing, right? From about 1 million barrels per day in 1920 to 4 million barrels per day in 1940, right? To 8 million barrels per day in the 60s, right? And then peaking at 1970 at 10 million barrels per day, right? Then it declined. This was noticeable. Now it declined for a few years, okay, as we went forward. Part of the reason that there were the oil crisis is not just the supply disruption from the OPEC countries, but we were producing less, right? So our supply was lower, right? We're also making less here. And then leveling off, okay, as we went forward in the early to mid 80s, Reagan years, and then as we went forward into the late 80s, into the 90s, into the early 2000s, dropping, right? Very new trend at the time. And by the time we got into the mid 2000s, there were some weeks where it was only just 4 million barrels per day, which is less than half of what it had been 30, 35 years earlier. Then a resurgence here in the early 2010s, drilling for shale oil, horizontal drilling techniques, okay? And by November 2017, a few years back, right, actually US peaked again. So, but there is evidence that this was a temporary trend. It does look, and of course we want to get away from this, right? Oil, the dominant fuel for transportation, right, is a source, transportation in the US is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. But there is evidence that this is more of a temporary thing, especially not just because it's a fossil fuel and there's limited supply, but the effort to try to go to more electric vehicles. We'll talk more about alternative fuels for transportation. So in the US, as oil production dropped, importation increased. So this curve here you see is basically also shown not as high a frequency by blue here. So there's not quite as many squiggles because it's more of a longer term average, longer trend average. But what you see is imports, right? Back in 1940, we weren't importing any oil. They slowly increased as we went forward while we were still producing more, US was. And then when we really had that noticeable drop here for the first time, around the early 70s, you start to see imports spiking up, right? And then we started producing more, and then the imports went down, and then as the drop continued, went back up. Okay. World oil production has increased the carrying capacity of Earth. Okay. You know, the world population of Earth, shown by blue, sorry, population of the world. World population of Earth is repetitive, right? So world population only passed 1 billion in the early 1800s. And then it passed 2 billion around 1900. The dramatic increase in oil production has allowed the carrying capacity of Earth to increase. So many products are made from oil. It's the dominant fuel for transportation. So many products, electronics, different cosmetics, believe it or not, toothpaste. There's a lot of products made from oil, okay? And at some point, it's likely that the world will reach a peak oil. Peak oil basically means we're at a maximum production. And then afterward, production starts to decline, okay? And so from about 2005 to 2011, world oil production was hovering around 72, 73, 74 million barrels per day. Okay. Once global oil peak has passed, basically half of the oil ever available will have been extracted, consumed, removed from underground, drilled. That's how oil is, the main way oil is extracted from underground. Also fracking, phasing that out in California, right? Because it pollutes groundwater, it causes small earthquakes. Production will then enter decline and cost will increase. So this is another reason to transition to alternative fuels for transportation. Okay. It is likely that after peak oil occurs, gas prices will go up because of demand exceeding supply. And by the way, there's an estimate that there's about 2 trillion barrels of oil that were ever available to be consumed and extracted, or extracted and consumed. And when we reach peak oil, that will have extracted and consumed 1 trillion of those. So we're going to talk about alternative energy sources for transportation, alternative to products made from oil, gasoline, and diesel next. Okay. And that's what we'll be talking about on Tuesday, May 4th. So we'll see you then. And I hope you enjoyed this lecture. And feel free to email me if you have any questions. Still have my usual office hours. And if you have any questions about the project or how you did on the midterm, I will be available. So thank you very much. And yeah, whatever day, if you are watching this on Thursday, whatever day it is, have a good one. So see you next time. Thank you.